Hello and a warm welcome to the Gupta Program. And I'm delighted today to have a wonderful guest with us, Dr. Joe Mather, who is the Medical Director of the Ruscio Institute for Functional Medicine. And as many of you have probably heard of the Ruscio Institute, it's here. Dr. Ruscio is a world famous clinician in the area of functional and integrative medicine. And we're delighted to have Joe with us, their medical director. And Joe himself has used the Gupta program to heal from conditions that we'll talk about. And so it's going to be a really interesting interview, and really delighted to have you here, Joe. How are you?
I am fantastic today, Ashok. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Joe, first of all, I wanted to start off with, I suppose, your personal journey, because many of us have come into this area as a result of our own experiences, our own kind of difficulties that we've gone through. So I'm very interested to hear your story and what first brought you to this type of medicine.
It was really curiosity and dissatisfaction with conventional medicine. I got to the end of my conventional medicine training, and I looked back at my clinic one day, and I realized I'd been seeing the same patients for 3 years and they weren't better, right?
Mm.
So I knew I was missing something. I knew I was a good doctor and doing the best guidelines and all the medications I was taught, right? But they weren't getting better. And ultimately, I became a doctor because I wanted to help heal patients. And so that opened the door to functional medicine, and many excellent mentors later, including Dr. Ruscio, Dr. Neil Nathan. I'm now happy to be the medical director working with Michael Ruscio.
Yeah, fantastic. And I guess obviously you've used the Gupta program, and we'll go kind of deeper into that. But when did you first start noticing your own kind of challenges in this particular area, and what was the journey from then on?
Yeah, so it started a few years after I had opened my private practice. So like many retrainers, there was a period of intense stress. And I've since learned that up to that point, I had never really taken a break ever,
Mm.
right? Overachieving all the way through high school to get to college, through university to get to medical school, through medical school. And then I couldn't just get an MD. I had to get a master's in public health at the same time.
Mm.
Really became inspired by functional medicine and wanted to open a private practice. So at one point I was working 3 jobs to be able to fund the opening of a private practice. Started a family, opening my practice, growing that business as a solo practitioner. And then COVID hit,
Hmm.
right? And then my office got moldy.
Right.
And I cleaned the AC closet, the building next to us, changed their air conditioner, changed the pressure. And here in New Orleans, we've got wet, moldy air, and my office became moldy. So I cleaned the AC, and downhill from there, right? That
Right.
was the trigger,
Mm.
and that was the start of my illness.
Right. So it sounds like almost a kind of perfect storm of various kind of factors coming together. And we talk a lot about this idea of the bucket theory, where there's a certain amount of stress that we can kind of handle. Mental, emotional, physical, biological stress. And when the water gets to the top of the bucket, when it pours over, then the body then adapts in some maladaptive form that's not great for us. Is that how it felt at the time?
That Looking back, absolutely. At the time, it was just despair, just deep fatigue, pain.
Mm.
I've always been interested in fitness and nutrition, and I remember at my worst, I had a kettlebell. It was I believe, a 20-pound kettlebell in my office, and I would, in between patients, just swing the kettlebell around to keep myself moving. And at my worst, I realized I did 6 kettlebell swings and was in bed the entire next day,
Yeah.
just completely shut down, and barely functioning, barely holding on for a little while. Pain
Mm.
all over, fatigue, and a lot of the symptoms that I now see in my mold toxicity patients were
Mm.
just devastating. So when I realized I needed limbic work was I'd been treating mold patients for about 18 months up to this point. So I knew what to do. I started myself on binders,
Mhm.
but minuscule doses of binders just rocked me. I would have pain all over, anxiety, palpitations,
Mm.
worsening fatigue. And Dr. Neil Nathan said, Joe, you need to do the Gupta program. And
Yeah.
so I said, yes, sir.
Yes, of course. Dr. Nathan, as well, for those who don't know, is one of the foremost experts around the world in mold illness and similar conditions. And I know him quite well. And as you said, he prescribes the Gupta program. So it's great that you had that kind of interaction and that advice. And many more patients, they are just too sensitive to be able to handle anything external, any medications, any supplements. And what impact did it have then on your life? I mean, you've described some of the symptoms, but can you go deeper into kind of mental, emotional, physical consequences of that?
Absolutely. So it's interesting to look back at that period of my time because I'm a very different person now. And when I was in the middle of it, there was a lot of depression. There was a lot of anxiety. There was agitation. I'd become angry, and I've historically been a very cheerful, optimistic person. I think if you would ask many people, they would say he's always smiling. He always seems to be happy, and that just turned off. And that was and it has been very, very challenging to feel like my personality had really betrayed me, right? And that was very disturbing, and it became hard on my wife and family, right? And so I really found that, so I ended up doing really 2 months of your program before engaging in treatment, specifically for the mold toxicity. And that's when things started to shift, and it wasn't overnight, right? But it was daily use for 2 solid months initially before I could then tolerate the binders, the charcoal, the clay, the chlorella, the things we use for mold toxicity. After that 2 months, things had calmed enough that I could then take the treatment, and then things started to shift. The mood started to ease, right? The energy started to come back up, and my resiliency went up so that I could, right, then take more treatments and then invest more in myself. That was the beginning. And I then used the program daily for 9 months, just solid every day. When I set my mind to something, I tend to do it. And so I really did that. And, just to skip a lot of maybe details, I stopped doing the program and thought I was better.
Yeah. Yeah. As many people do. Yes.
We physicians are not immune to this. And, we can know this intellectually, and we can know this because we see it in our patients. But when it comes to us, we have blind spots, right? And so I convinced myself I didn't need it. And I have recently restarted back up. I learned I just needed that extra support to keep me operating at a high level. And without it, I was becoming more reactive to treatments I could tolerate before. Some of the antifungal medications, right? The mood was souring again, right? And so I was really, really kind of going backwards. But happily, in the past month particularly, I've been doing it back every day. And the second time is even better than the first.
Okay, that's a good messaging for all of our retrainers, actually, that, it really is one of those things where the amount of energy that you put into the program, or, the effort that you put into the program, it will pay back. And the nature of our mind is that complacency. It's natural that, okay, I'm feeling better now, right? I don't need that anymore. We very much link inputs and outputs. I do this, I get this output, done, Yep. And as you've realized, and many of us realize, and I realized when I had to go through my own process, it's a lifelong process of maybe not the entire Gupta program, but certainly certain parts of it continuing as part of our lifestyle to ensure health. And maybe that's our own body's messaging telling us to kind of keep healthy for the rest of our lives as well.
It certainly made me more understanding of my patients. At the Ruscio Institute, we treat a lot of patients with chronic bowel disease, right? And so we're using a lot of GI medicine, we're using dietary interventions and probiotics and herbal treatments, and our patients get better. They do great from a GI perspective, right? And the ceiling gets higher, and so they then do more, and then their ceiling gets higher, and then what happens is they end up bumping their head on the ceiling. They do too much, right? And they realize that they have just overstretched themselves or overcommitted. And then we say, oh, that's okay. We just need to maybe go back to what was working, right?
Yes, exactly. And I think it's, as we've talked about, I think when we spoke before, that many people, nutritionists, naturopaths, functional and integrative doctors, they will notice that there can be certain things that, even without brain retraining, there are certain things that definitely help and support people's health. But what they also tell me is as soon as a really big stressful situation comes into that person's life, suddenly they can go back to square one again. Yep. And that's really puzzling for the clinicians, because how can it be that they've had that improvement for those interventions and yet
Yeah.
they can go back to square one? And what we say is that definitely the downstream aspects of this triggering that we talk about in the Gupta program in the brain, the impacts on the body can definitely be improved, obviously, with all these various
Yes.
treatments. But if the brain suddenly gets into that hyperactive mode, it will re-trigger all of those defensive responses, no matter how the body is dealing with it downstream. And is that what you've experienced as well? That kind of
Both
dichotomy?
personally and professionally, right? So that's exactly how I felt when I let myself become overwhelmed. I think I had dropped too many of the supportive treatments, and I felt like I was back at square one, right?
Mm,
Now, just a few weeks into restarting some of the supportive treatments, and particularly the Gupta program, I feel back where I was, right?
mm,
And so I'm at that level where I was much quicker, right?
mm,
It took many months of work before, and now it's been a few weeks. And so, yes, and professionally, I see this all the time in my patients, right?
mm,
I'm having many patients use the Gupta program as one of the initial steps that we do as we work together. And I find that it's accelerating healing in a number of conditions, autoimmune conditions, gut conditions, toxicity issues like mold. And
mm,
so it's been really helpful
mm,
for my patients. So
mm.
the biggest reason I'm excited about this interview is just to be able to tell patients that it works, and thank you, right? Because you've
Mm.
made a big difference in my life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, Jay.
Yeah.
Appreciated that. And in your patients, I think it'd be interesting. You've mentioned a number of different conditions there. Are there any conditions that you've been surprised by that have actually improved using the Gupta program tools?
Yes. Okay. So just a word about our clinic. We primarily treat chronic complex disease, and our average patient has been through multiple physicians before seeking our help. And so we've had to get really good at what does this patient need and maybe what was missed, right? So I see a lot of areas where your program helps my patients. The thing that's been most pleasantly surprising is in a condition called mast cell activation syndrome.
Hmm.
This is notoriously hard to diagnose and manage. And while we often see this improving with a number of antihistamines and supplements or medications, I have been so thrilled at the response of some of my patients with mast cell. I
Mm,
remember one patient, she's a 45-year-old gal with mold exposure, a lot of anxiety, chronic fatigue, and reactivity with food and treatment, right? So
mhm,
classic case of mold toxicity, limbic dysfunction, right?
mhm,
She did your program, and in 3 months I was like, okay, well, tell me how the quercetin and the DAO, the Claritin, you're still using those? She's like, oh no, I haven't been on those for a month. I'm not reacting to anything anymore. the,
mm,
the thing that I changed was she had been doing the Gupta program.
mm,
So that to me is tells the power of retraining your mind, because we're talking about the mind, the hypothalamus, the nervous system, engaging the immune system. The mast cell is kind of the soldier on the ground.
mm.
You can retrain the brain, and the soldier stands down. It,
Exactly.
it's quite amazing. It's quite amazing and profound. And until I had done it myself and seen it work one or two dozen times, it would have been hard to convince me that this is that powerful,
Hmm.
but it is.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's so pleasing for me to hear these types of stories, because it's once again reinforcing the work that we're doing. And when we see a clinician like yourself with such experience and expertise saying this, then it's it really propels us forward to in the
Good.
research arena as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. And do you want to go through perhaps a couple of case studies? I mean, you mentioned one there with a lady with mold. Anything else you'd like to share that may kind of inspire others?
Absolutely. So I see a lot of patients with mold toxicity, and in my experience, patients with mold toxicity are uniquely vulnerable. And this seems to be the major cause, at least in my world, of limbic dysfunction. I think that the mold itself is so toxic to the nervous system and brain that it generates a really, really strong negative response in the body and is uniquely primed to cause limbic dysfunction. The other main issue is simply, let me say two things. One is being ill for a long time. There's something uniquely disruptive about the time in which someone is ill and feeling bad and suffering. I think that's another trigger. And the final thing I would want to mention is I think a lot of my colleagues in integrative and functional medicine are inadvertently causing too much fear in their patients. They're saying that if you eat a single bite of gluten, that you're going to flare autoimmunity, right? They're saying you need to be on 8 cups of spinach a day or you're not getting the fiber and B vitamins. They're saying you need to be on this strict diet and these protocols and this ozone treatment. And I can't help but think they need to stop. I can't help but think that our field is too heavily being influenced by fear. And I think people need to kind of step back and ask, are the recommendations they're giving really serving their patients, or are they causing more disruption?
Joe, I really want to pick up on this point because I think this is something that we share with most of our clients, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is that in some ways, many of us in this alternative space, we've come into it because we've seen that the mainstream medical model is brilliant for certain types of conditions, but doesn't correctly diagnose or treat these kind of more functional conditions or ones which, it's a different type of medicine. And we've been railing against the kind of reductionist approach, which is treating the body like a car and saying, right, there's something wrong with the engine, right, let's fix that. Something wrong with the tire, let's fix that. Let's fix the whole body. And yet, as you say, there's a danger that we have that when we start measuring certain levels of hormones or vitamins or enzymes, we start working with exactly that reductionist philosophy, which is, look, that's 10% lower, right? And you're not going to get better until we fix that. Or this is 5% high, we need to fix that. And actually, we need to cut out all this type of food and all gluten and all dairy and all these different things, which, as you say, all that does is create more fear in the mind. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Firstly, it kind of creates a sense of, oh, there's an understanding as to what may be causing my condition. So there's a bit of relief, but then there's more fear that, oh, wow, I cannot even have, as you say, this bit of gluten or this. And then this exclusion diet becomes incredibly anxiety provoking because then you're on standby if you accidentally eat a particular thing. And what we've also noticed is then people, when they go on those exclusion diets, the body and the brain start reacting even more, thinking, right, well, I shouldn't eat that either and that either because that's similar. And the brain goes into this lockdown phase where people get reduced to 3 or 4 or 5 foods sometimes. Absolutely. So do you kind of talk about what may be happening there?
I see this all the time, and this is one of the. I just completely agree with everything you've said. And from my perspective, many integrative doctors came from an MD conventional standpoint, and I think implicit in that training are a couple ideas. One, that reductionist. If I can just get these thyroid values into a perfect optimal range, my patient will be better. Doesn't work like that. If I can just get the B vitamins here, that's not how healing works. They carry that reductionist model into the field of functional medicine, where there are ideas of why people are sick, but it's inappropriately done, right? We find at our clinic that it's often the order that matters to get people better, and working on the fundamentals first and foremost clears up so many issues that you don't need to try to measure and cram their thyroid into small ranges. The other idea that's held over is the idea that you just have to kill everything, right? From MDs, we have antibiotics, right? We can just kill it, things will get better. That doesn't work as well. If a patient comes out of a doctor's visit more fearful, then I think they've been harmed.
Right.
And patients who have been told the only way to get better is to eliminate nightshade vegetables and nuts and seeds and dairy and gluten, and they end up worrying all day long. They end up worrying not just when they're eating, but before they eat and after they eat. And then they get a symptom 30 minutes after they eat and they say, oh my God, it was the celery. I can't eat celery anymore, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they just had a little bit of gas, right? Or it could have been a number of things, and they end up narrowing their diet. And these are patients that need a particularly a different approach.
Yeah.
And I think recognizing that early on has allowed us to help a lot of these patients. But you're right on it. And I just, any practitioner listening, elimination diets are fantastic in the right setting, in the right place, but less is more.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have an anti-inflammatory diet, even in the Gupta program, that we recommend. It's a generally healthy diet, but we call it the 80% anti-inflammatory diet.
Sure.
So it gives you a bit of leeway to say, I don't have to do this 100% of the time, which then relieves the fear. Yeah. So of course we want people to eat well. Of course we don't want them to be stimulating their gut and their brains and all these kinds of things. But taken too strictly, you're actually re-stimulating all the things that you're trying to stop stimulating.
Exactly.
So there's a kind of irony there.
Can I add a follow-on point?
Yeah, sure.
We see patients being harmed taking boatloads of supplements. 90 to 120 capsules a day. They're taking supplements 4 or 5 times a day. They're taking things before meals, empty stomach, first when they wake up, with their medicines, at bedtime. And this is particularly triggering for many patients. If they have any limbic imbalance, if they're already operating at a disadvantage there, every single time they swallow a pill, it's telling their subconscious, you're sick, you need this medicine to be better. So maybe 90 times a day, they're, oh my God, I'm sick. Oh, I need that B vitamin or whatever it is, right? And sometimes the best treatment we can do for patients to say, you need to stop everything. Yeah. We need to reset. We need to stop everything. We can always add things on later if needed, but right now this is not serving you and you're not better. And I saw a patient just last month, and she was in a similar category as she was being overtreated too aggressively for what her body needed. Right? Stopped everything. She did so much better. Got her on the Gupta program, so much better. So, yeah. Yeah.
No, interesting you say that, because I think with patients, there tends to be a post-rationalization, because obviously they trust their doctors and their alternative practitioners, and they want to believe in this. So they'll think like, oh, as you say, I'm feeling worse now because I had that piece of bread, right? Or I'm feeling worse now because I didn't take my supplements today. Yeah. And therefore, and actually they would have felt worse regardless of what had happened, but it's now becoming X equals Y. And we're constantly, and that's the nature of us as human beings, we make linkages between different bits of data to try and understand the world around us, try to understand ourselves. But that can actually be to our detriment, because then we start making links that don't actually exist. We were just going to feel worse anyway, regardless of what we did.
I'll speak for myself. I'm guilty of this occasionally as well. I won't speak for you, but this is, I think, the human condition. I think we are uniquely looking for patterns, sometimes where patterns don't exist. And so getting a trusted third party in there to say, I think this is helpful and maybe this is not, and we can check here is usually the best move.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually overprescribing, as you've said, we know that in mainstream medicine, overprescribing is an actual issue, right? So we know that medications, I think, is the second or third highest reason for deaths in the US. I think it's the third highest cause of death is actually medications themselves. And in the same way, when we're overprescribing in terms of supplements and enzymes and all kinds of things, that also can be toxic for the body when there's too much going in, and it needs to be more laser focused as to what's actually important.
I agree completely.
Yeah.
You know, I see there's additives that help when you actually want to make a supplement. You need to add things like magnesium stearate to the capsule so it can work through the machine and then fill in the capsule and go in the bottle. If you make a tablet, you have to have all the binders to keep all of the components nice and packed together. Those can cause leaky gut. And so we have patients where their chronic GI dysfunction is because they're swallowing 30 capsules of stuff a day. Yeah. And it's the treatment, right? That's not serving them. And so simplifying is really important. And so
and I think
I'll leave it there.
No, I agree. And I think it's, the analogy I always use is, imagine you're standing on a bridge and you're seeing people in the river below you drowning. So you jump into the river and you pull them out. and then you see another person in the river and you pull them out, and another person in the river, and you keep pulling these people out of the river, but no one's asking the question, who's throwing these people in the river upstream, right, in the first place, right? And
Yes.
so it is that we can do a great amount of work, and this is such important work. So I want everyone to be very clear. We're not dogmatic that only do this and don't do that. So you are helping the body handle this particular lack of homeostasis, for a better word. But at the same time, if you go upstream, you realize you fix the issues upstream, and the body naturally becomes its own best detoxifier. As an example, you can try and help the body detoxify, but it can do it the best itself when we put it into that right optimal healing state to be able to do that. And obviously, even people with the genetic shifts and changes, we just want to support the body's ability to be able to do that.
And I love that story as well. It's always such a fun story, like building the hospital at the end of the river. Hey, we pulled out 500 people this year.
Yeah.
From my perspective, you have all these reasons why people become ill. And a good clinician has many that they're confident treating and they know and they can identify. There's always the question then of, when do you treat them? How do you treat them? And in what order do you treat them? It's not as simple as saying, there are these 5 things wrong, get them. There's an art to this that I think is missed. And I'm hoping to be able to teach more people through our work at the Ruscio Institute. So for example, I have a lot of patients where we don't do anything until they've done your program for 2 months. Their limbic system is too unstable to take the treatments they need. They're going to react, they're going to self-destruct, they're going to have issues with every treatment until they've calmed their limbic system down. But then once the limbic system, that support has been put up, right, they're standing a little taller, that they're a little less likely to be blown over, we can start gently treating those issues, right? And then how you treat those issues matters. Oftentimes we don't go right to the detoxification of the mold if we haven't fixed the gut, right?
Yeah.
So you're trying to do things in the right order for each patient, and patients need a different approach. With each person is different, right? But the right order matters, and you don't want to just go right to, I've got SIBO, therefore I need, these half a dozen antimicrobial herbs if you haven't done the basics first.
Yeah.
Right. So I would just add that as something I've really learned. And quite honestly, my chronic fatigue patients, my mold toxic patients, my irritable bowel patients, they've taught me that, right? Because I wasn't always this good and I messed it up a couple of times, right?
Yeah, of course. And there's always a process of experimentation and understanding, what's working. And we describe it like a recipe, right? It is like you can have all the different ingredients, but if you don't combine them in the right recipe in the right moment, the cake is going to not turn out right.
That's a good one. I'm gonna keep that.
Yeah. And for you personally, Joe, and perhaps your clients as well, what are the kind of critical success factors for making the Gupta program work? And I think, we've talked about, not becoming complacent with it and those kinds of things, but what really made it work for you, do you think?
I had to trust it was going to help and do it every day. And I think that was really important for me. And I would go farther. There's kind of a divide. So I in our clinic, we identify patients who very likely need your program and are going to succeed with it, and we get them to it. And then there's usually the patients who say, Dr. Joe told me to do this. I'm going to work on it every day, just as he said. And they do great, right? And then we can open up to other treatments and get them better. There are kind of is a second path, and some are just, they don't want to do it and they don't decide not to do it. And then we kind of struggle typically. There's a third group of patients who do it a little.
Right.
And they usually say, okay, well, I'm listening to Soften and Flow. And I say, well, how often are you doing the full 7-step retraining technique? And they say, oh, well, I'm not really doing that. I'm just trying to meditate. And then we have a discussion saying, well, the gem, I call it the gem, the gold of the program is really the 7-step retraining technique. You need to be doing that many times a day. I've already done it twice. And, and it might be as simple as 1 minute before you eat. But the patients that are consistently doing that module 5, the 7-step technique, if they go right there and just spend energy just nailing that and feeling that, they do the best.
Yeah, and that chimes with our experience. You know, when we look do surveys with our patients and whatever, the critical success factor. You know, people would love to have this magic bullet or this particular idea or something secret that we haven't figured out. Why do people get better using this program? They just say, just doing it, right? Just doing the brain retraining and not picking and choosing what it is that you're going to use. And as you say, some people say, oh, well, I'll do this meditation bit because that bit's, you know, kind of straightforward and easy, and I won't do the other bits. No, that's not the program. The core part of the program, as you say, is the brain retraining, especially the sessions 5 and that type of brain retraining, and then the accelerator that comes later. That's the real core of it. And the other techniques are simply to support neuroplasticity, to support your brain being more flexible, to enable it to retrain. And it sounds like you've had that experience yourself and your clients as well.
Yeah. So sometimes you have to kind of say, okay, well, do it your way. If you're not better quickly, you're doing it my way.
Right. That's a good deal.
Then you have to go listen to Ashok. So we find that all the time in our patients in our clinic. And it's such a useful modality because, you know, at heart, I'm an MD, I'm a medical doctor, and I'm excellent at what is wrong with this patient and what tools do we have that are evidence-based to fix them, right? That's what I've been thinking about for decades, right? Having this tool to support that has just been a game changer for my patients, right? So I can give them what I think is the best medical care available, and then also know that they are training deep emotional and instinctual parts of their brain that quercetin doesn't change, right? or whatever. So it's been a game changer, truly.
And how have your clients been taking to it? As you say, some are, you know, will embrace it, some will be a little hesitant. But overall, what's been their overall experience of actually have they enjoyed doing the program? Do they have resistances to it?
I would say that the overwhelming vast majority, 80% or more, love it because it helps them and it changes their life. And I mean, quite honestly, I wouldn't be here talking to you if I didn't see that type of response in my patients. I'm very particular about what I ask my patients to do. And I'm very particular about trying to avoid the nonsense that a lot of doctors throw at patients. And if I'm going to ask a patient to invest their money, several $100s, and months of their time, I need to be absolutely convinced it's going to work. And I have that explicit trust with your program. I've done it myself. I've seen it change my patients. And these are patients, remember, they're not just patients who've got some bloating after they eat. They're typically patients who've been ill for 2 decades or more. They have symptoms in every area of their body. Some of them can barely get out of bed to function throughout the day. Many of them are on medical leave. Some people are so sick from mold and environmental toxicities, they live in a tent. They live in their car. Some patients come in with 3 foods, right? And so a lot of these patients are so extremely vulnerable and sensitive that if I tell them to do 3 things and I'm asking them to do something that's unattainable, I'll never see them again. They're going to continue to suffer. So I have to be very careful about what I ask patients to do and when. And time again, the Gupta program has really helped shift these patients to where I can start to heal them. So from that standpoint, it's extremely helpful. And so thank you. It makes my life easier and it helps my patients.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great, Joe. Well, it's been absolutely fascinating to get your perspective on this, especially because your background as a clinician yourself and a medical doctor, but also running this type of clinic and seeing how you can integrate something which is actually quite new and different and completely off the beaten track, as it were. For now, yeah. And kind of integrate it into your practice. And I, really appreciate you. It's a certain leap of faith of doing that and then seeing the results for yourself and other people. And, that's wonderful. So thank you for all the great work that you do in this area and supporting, patients on the Gupta program as well.
Well, thank you. I hope some people hear this and are encouraged to do the program because it helps.
Yeah, great. And finally, any advice for, I suppose the practitioners, the people who are seeing these clients again and again? They might be functional integrative doctors, alternative practitioners, naturopaths, who are a bit kind of cautious about this type of approach. Anything you'd like to share with them?
I would say it's not just my experience that this is helpful. It's not just me personally, and it's not just my patients, right? It'd be very easy for me to placebo my patients into something working. Hey, Johnny, you got to do the Gupta program. It's the only thing that'll help you, blah, blah, blah. And they say, oh, okay, all right. And they get a little bit of a response, and then maybe it fades away. That doesn't happen. Patients do the program and are profoundly changed and are able to take treatments that they were not able to take before. And oftentimes they've been sick for a decade. So I think that there's a level of clinical evidence that it works, but it's not just my patients. Dr. Ruscio uses it. His patients benefit, right? Dr. Abbott in our clinic, Dr. Hamlin, they are all using this. It's all working. And not just our clinic, right? We've got Dr. Nathan consistently uses this with his patients, and on and on. So this is a reproducible effect, if you will. And I know that you guys are contributing to research, and I know you're excited about showing that this works, and time is going to show. I just have no doubt that you're going to have multiple papers published showing that it helps. And any practitioner with any skepticism or hesitation, try it. It works. You'll be surprised.
Wow, thank you so much, Joe, for that. That's really kind of encouraging, because certainly we have continual conversations with various organizations and practices, and it's great to have someone like yourself kind of sharing their experiences, and it really makes a difference.
Good. I'm so glad.
Before we finish off, anything else you'd like to add, Joe?
Only that if you're still struggling and you'd like a medical second opinion, we're taking patients at the Ruscio Institute. It's the Ruscio Institute, RUSCIO, RuscioInstitute.com. I'm there. We've got a bunch of clinicians that I help train, and we all work together to get people better. So if you need help, we're here. And
great.
Keep on retraining.
Yes, thank you, Joe. Well, if you want to find out more about Joe's work and the Ruscio Institute, Joe's mentioned the website there, and we'll put it on the notes as well. And Joe, thank you so much for joining us, and good luck with your personal health and the health of your clients. And moving forward, let's hope we can get more medical studies that show the power and the impact of neuroplasticity and brain retraining on a whole host of chronic conditions. And let's get the world better.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe.
Nice to talk to you.
Thank you. Bye.